The morning sun glinted off the azure waters of South Haven Beach, casting a shimmering path across the waves that had made this stretch of Earth's coastline famous throughout the galaxy. Dr. Mira Stanton stood at the medical observation post, her practiced eyes scanning the diverse crowd of interplanetary visitors preparing for the day's interspecies peace surfing competition. After 15 years as an emergency physician, specializing in multi-species care, and 3 tours as a military medic on humanitarian missions, she thought she'd seen everything. Today would prove her wrong. "Beautiful conditions," remarked Ensign Kaya, the young human technician checking the medical scanners beside her. "Perfect day for breaking boundaries." Mira nodded, squinting against the sunlight. "That's what worries me. When everyone's pushing limits, my job gets complicated." The beach teemed with life forms from across 12 solar systems. Hydraxians, with their translucent blue skin, glistened as they glided toward the water's edge. Their natural affinity for liquid environments made them favorites in the junior divisions, though their delicate internal structures required special consideration in Earth's gravity. Nearby, a group of Pelians with their feather-like appendages and lightweight skeletal structures practiced balancing on training boards, their movements graceful despite being away from their low-gravity homeworld. The competition had become a symbol of interspecies cooperation over the past decade, a celebration of shared passion transcending biological differences. For Mira, it represented something more, a fascinating study in comparative physiology and a challenge to her medical expertise. "Dr. Stanton," called a voice behind her. "The safety briefing starts in 5 minutes." She turned to see Lieutenant Eric, a Hydraxian safety coordinator whose silver-blue skin rippled slightly with each word. "I'll be right there. Just making sure our medical protocols are updated for all participating species." "Much appreciated," Arik replied, his large eyes blinking vertically. "Some of our younger participants are experiencing Earth's oceans for the first time. It's more forceful than our home waters." "That's why we're here," Mira reassured him with a practiced smile. "To make sure everyone goes home with nothing but good memories, and maybe a trophy or two." As Arik moved away, Mira couldn't shake a subtle sense of unease. The weather reports had been clear, optimal conditions, no anomalies forecasted, but she'd learned from her military service that disaster rarely announced itself in advance. "Run one more diagnostic on the emergency transporters," she instructed Kaya, "and double-check our stock of universal coagulants. Let's be over-prepared." The morning proceeded as planned. Junior competitors from 7 planets demonstrated remarkable skill navigating Earth's waves. The crowd cheered as a young Hydraxian executed a perfect aerial maneuver, their form momentarily suspended above the crest of a wave before gracefully descending. The first indication of trouble came not from the sky, but from beneath the water. Mira noticed it before anyone else, a subtle change in the wave patterns, a gathering of energy where there should be none. "Something's wrong," she muttered, reaching for her scanner. "Readings are normal," Kaya replied, but Mira was already moving toward the shoreline. The ocean withdrew suddenly, as if taking a deep breath. Mira's military training kicked in instantly. "Clear the water!" she shouted into her communicator, the emergency channel broadcasting her voice across the beach. "All competitors out now!" The response was immediate, but not fast enough. The ocean surged forward with unexpected force, a rogue wave generated by a subsurface seismic event, too small for the early warning systems to detect, but large enough to create a wall of water that crashed over the competition area. Chaos erupted as the wave receded, leaving scattered competitors and equipment across the beach. Human lifeguards were already in motion, but Mira's focus locked onto the smaller, non-human participants who had taken the brunt of the impact. "Medical emergency protocols activated," announced the automated system as Mira raced toward a young Hydraxian lying motionless on the sand. Lieutenant Eric was already there, panic evident in his rapidly shifting skin coloration. He was thrown against a rock formation, Auric explained, his voice trembling. Our bodies aren't designed to withstand such impacts. Mira's medical scanner revealed the damage: 3 fractured ribs and developing pleural effusion, fluid building around the lungs. For a Hydraxian, this was potentially fatal due to their intricate respiratory system. Emergency treatment pod, now, she ordered. And within seconds, a transparent medical capsule descended from the hovering medical unit. As she worked to stabilize the young competitor, her peripheral vision registered other scenes unfolding: medical teams attending to injured participants, most of them non-human. What struck her immediately was the pattern of injuries. The human competitors who had been caught in the same wave were largely walking away with bruises and minor lacerations. A human child, no older than 12, was already sitting up, receiving treatment for a sprained wrist, while next to him, an adult Pelian remained unconscious from what appeared to be a similar impact force. "Transfer complete," announced the pod as it sealed around the young Hydraxian. "Initiating emergency transport to Interplanetary Medical Center." Mira moved to the next patient, a Pelian competitor with injuries to the spinal column. Their neurological readings fluctuated dangerously. "Dr. Stanton," called Dr. Saul Fall, a Pelian neurological specialist who had been observing the competition. "Our physiology—" "I know," Mira interrupted, her hands moving with practiced precision as she administered a specialized neural stabilizer. "Their central nervous system can't handle the shock the same way ours can. We need to prevent secondary cascade failure." For the next 3 hours, Mira worked tirelessly, moving from one patient to another. The pattern became increasingly clear and increasingly troubling. Injuries that human competitors shrugged off were life-threatening to other species. A teenage human with 3 fractured ribs was already sitting up, talking to his parents about when he could get back in the water. The young Hydraxian with similar injuries remained in critical condition, his survival chances hovering around 50%. By late afternoon, the crisis response had transitioned to the Interplanetary Medical Center, where Mira found herself explaining the situation to a room full of specialists from various worlds. "The differential injury patterns are remarkable," she explained, displaying holographic comparisons of trauma scans. Impacts that caused minor bruising in humans resulted in severe internal injuries among Hydraxians and spinal damage among Pelians. "This isn't exactly new information," Dr. Stanton noted, one of the senior physicians, a human who specialized in comparative xenobiology. "We've long known that human physiology has certain resiliences." "Not to this extent," Mira countered, pulling up additional data. "Look at the tissue recovery rates. The human participants are already showing accelerated healing responses. Their connective tissues are adapting to the trauma in ways that—" "Are you suggesting humans have some sort of biological advantage?" interrupted Dr. Saul Fall, his feathered crest rising slightly in what Mira recognized as a sign of agitation. "I'm suggesting we have differences that we haven't fully accounted for in our interspecies medical protocols," Mira clarified. "Differences that could be critical in emergency scenarios like today's." The meeting concluded with a decision to establish a research initiative, but Mira sensed resistance among some of the non-human specialists. As she walked through the recovery ward later that evening, checking on patients, Lieutenant Eric approached her. "The young one you saved. He's stabilizing," Auric said, his skin showing patterns of cautious optimism. "But there's talk among some visitors. Concerns about human biological advantages." Mira sighed. "That's not what I was trying to suggest." "I understand," Auric replied, "but others might not. There's a history here. Competitive species often fear advantages they don't possess." The next morning brought new challenges. News reports had already begun circulating throughout the interplanetary community. Human resilience raises questions of unfair biological advantage. Mira found herself suddenly at the center of a scientific and ethical debate she hadn't intended to start. The young Hydraxian's condition had stabilized overnight, but several other patients remained critical. Mira focused her attention on a Pelian athlete with severe spinal trauma. Conventional treatments were proving ineffective, their nervous system too different from human physiology for standard approaches to work. "We need to try something else," she told Dr. Sol Fall, who had joined her despite their tense exchange the previous day. "Such as?" The Pelian doctor's feathers remained flat against his head, a sign of skepticism. "A combined approach. Your people's regenerative biotechnology with our understanding of trauma response." Mira pulled up research data on her tablet. "Humans have this remarkable ability to form scar tissue quickly. It's not elegant, but it's effective at preventing further damage. If we could combine that with your species' neural regeneration techniques—" "That's untested," Sewell pointed out. "Potentially dangerous." "More dangerous than doing nothing?" Mira challenged. After hours of debate and careful preparation, they proceeded with the experimental treatment. The process was delicate, mapping human coagulation and tissue repair genes onto Pelian regenerative frameworks. For 3 days, they monitored the patient anxiously, adjusting parameters and holding their breath with each new scan. On the 4th day, the Pelian athlete showed the first signs of neurological recovery. "It's working," Mira whispered, hardly daring to believe the readings. "The hybrid approach is actually working." Dr. Sol Fall studied the scans with intense concentration. "This is unexpected. The human repair mechanisms are integrating with our neural pathways, creating a scaffold for regeneration." Word of their success spread quickly through the medical community. Mira found herself receiving requests from specialists across the galaxy, all wanting to understand how human biological resilience might be adapted to help other species. Not everyone welcomed this development. A group calling themselves Purity of Species began circulating concerns about the ethics of cross-species medical integration. Each species evolved its own solutions. Their statement read, "Blending biological advantages disrupts natural balance and creates dependency." Mira dismissed these concerns initially, focused instead on expanding her research to help more patients. Working with Lieutenant Eric, she developed a modified treatment for the young Hydraxian, whose recovery had plateaued. "Human tissue has this remarkable plasticity," she explained to Arik as they prepared the treatment. "We adapt to damage in ways your people don't, forming bridges of collagen, rerouting blood supply around injuries. If we can map those pathways into your physiology—" "You're suggesting we become more human?" Arik asked, his skin rippling with complex emotions. "No," Mira corrected firmly. "I'm suggesting we learn from each other. Your people have adaptations we couldn't dream of. Respiration efficiency, pressure tolerance. This isn't about making anyone more human. It's about sharing survival strategies." The second wave of controversy came as Mira prepared to present her findings at the Galactic Medical Conference. Anonymous threats suggested some saw her work as a form of human biological imperialism. Security was increased around the medical center, and Mira found herself questioning whether she had overstepped some invisible boundary. "Maybe they're right," she confided to Ensign Kaya one evening as they reviewed patient data. "Maybe I'm imposing human solutions on non-human problems. Or maybe you're doing exactly what medicine has always done," Kaya countered. "Finding what works and using it to help people, all people, regardless of what planet they call home." Before Mira could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. Emergency channels exploded with reports of another anomalous wave, larger than the first, heading towards South Haven Beach, where a memorial service for the competition was underway. "We need to evacuate immediately," ordered the security chief. "All medical personnel to emergency stations." Mira was already moving, gathering emergency supplies. On the monitor, she could see the beach where dozens of beings from various worlds had gathered to pay respects and place memorial offerings in the water. They won't all get out in time, she realized, watching the wave approach on the tracking system. Among those still near the water's edge was a small group of young Hydraxians, including several patients recently released from care. Without hesitation, Mira headed for the door. "Dr. Stanton," Kaya called after her. "Where are you going?" "To the beach. Those kids won't stand another impact." "The evacuation order." "Doesn't change my job," Mira replied, already running toward the emergency transport. She reached the beach minutes before the wave. Warning sirens wailed as most attendees rushed toward higher ground. Mira spotted the young Hydraxians near the water, confused by the sudden chaos. "This way!" she shouted, racing toward them. "Move to higher ground now!" The children looked up, recognition dawning on their translucent faces. One of them was her patient, the first one she had treated after the original wave. They started moving toward her, as the ocean again pulled back ominously. Mira reached them just as the water returned with devastating force. In a split-second decision, she positioned herself between the children and the oncoming wave, using her body as a shield as the water crashed over them. The impact was tremendous. Mira felt something crack in her back as she was thrown against a rock formation, still clutching two of the young Hydraxians protectively. The water receded, leaving her broken and gasping on the sand. But the children were largely unharmed, protected by her body. "Dr. Stanton!" Lieutenant Eric's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Don't move. Help is coming." Mira tried to respond, but found she couldn't feel her legs. The scanner in Eric's hand emitted a series of urgent beeps. "Multiple internal injuries," she heard someone say. "Cervical vertebrae fractures. Possible paralysis." As consciousness began to fade, Mira experienced a moment of crystal clarity. The injuries she had sustained would be fatal to a Hydraxian or Pelian. Even with human resilience, her prognosis was uncertain at best. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very biological advantages she had been studying might now determine her own survival. "Get her to the center," ordered a familiar voice, Dr. Saul Fall, "and contact everyone who's been working on the cross-species regeneration projects. We're going to need all of them." Mira awakened 3 days later to find herself in a specialized treatment chamber. Around her stood an unlikely alliance: Dr. Saul Fall, Lieutenant Eric, Ensign Kaya, and several other specialists from various worlds. "Welcome back," Saul said, his feathers arranged in what Mira recognized as a pattern of cautious optimism. "You've given us quite the challenge." "My injuries," Mira began, surprised to discover she could speak. "Severe," confirmed Eric. "By any species standards. Spinal cord damage, internal hemorrhaging, multiple fractures." "But you're responding to treatment," added Kaya with a smile. "A very special treatment." Slowly, they explained what had happened. While Mira lay unconscious, the specialists had convened an emergency summit. Setting aside political concerns and species rivalries, they had pooled their knowledge to develop a treatment protocol combining the best of multiple worlds' medical technologies. "We use the human coagulation pathways you mapped as a starting point," explained Saul. "Then integrated Pelian neural regeneration techniques and Hydraxian cellular repair mechanisms. The very treatments you pioneered for us," added Auric, "adapted back to human physiology." Mira tried to process this information. "So I'm... what? Some kind of medical hybrid experiment?" "You're the beneficiary of the bridges you built," corrected Saul. "And perhaps proof that no species has all the answers alone." Recovery was slow and painful. For weeks, Mira underwent intensive therapy, gradually regaining sensation and movement. The young Hydraxians she had saved visited regularly, fascinated by her recovery process and eager to share their own healing stories. "Your cells are doing something interesting," Lieutenant Auric told her one afternoon as they reviewed her latest scans. "They're not just accepting our treatments, they're learning from them, adapting in ways we didn't predict." Isn't that dangerous? Mira asked. Actually, it's remarkable, Arik replied, his skin displaying patterns of scientific excitement. Your human adaptability extends to the cellular level. You're not just recovering, you're integrating. 6 months after the wave that nearly claimed her life, Mira stood before the Galactic Medical Conference, leaning slightly on a cane, but otherwise showing remarkably few signs of her near-fatal injuries. What we discovered through necessity has implications far beyond emergency medicine, she told the assembled delegates. Each species evolved different solutions to survival challenges. Humans developed exceptional tissue repair and adaptability because our evolution demanded it. Others among you evolved different strengths: pressure tolerance, radiation resistance, neural efficiency. She gestured to the diverse group of specialists seated in the front row, her unlikely medical team. When we stop seeing these differences as advantages or disadvantages and start seeing them as complementary resources, we open new frontiers in healing. The presentation concluded with the announcement of the Multi-Species Regenerative Medicine Initiative, a collaborative research program dedicated to combining biological approaches across species lines. The conference hall erupted in applause as beings from dozens of worlds rose in recognition of a new chapter in interspecies medicine. Later that evening, at a small gathering of those who had been part of her treatment team, Mira raised a glass in toast. To finding strength in vulnerability, she said. And to humans, added Lieutenant Arik with a ripple of amusement across his skin, who turned being fragile into an evolutionary strategy. Dr. Solfall's feathers arranged themselves in a pattern of thoughtful consideration. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson here. What seems like weakness in one context becomes strength in another. Your species' very vulnerability, your constant exposure to injuries, and your need to recover quickly created resilience mechanisms unlike anything in the galaxy. And yet not enough on their own, Mira pointed out. I wouldn't be standing here without Pelian neural regeneration techniques or Hydraxian cellular mapping. A perfect symbiosis, agreed Sol. As the gathering continued, Mira stepped out onto the balcony overlooking South Haven Beach. The waves that had nearly claimed her life now rolled gently against the shore. A small group of interspecies children, human, Hydraxian, and Pelian, were building an elaborate sand structure together, each contributing according to their natural abilities. Ensign Kaya joined her at the railing. Quite a view, isn't it? More than you know, Mira replied. 6 months ago, I thought I was researching biological advantages. Now I understand it was never about advantage at all. It was about complementarity. The next generation seems to have figured that out already, Kaya observed, nodding toward the children. They usually do, Mira agreed with a smile. They're not bound by our preconceptions. 1 year to the day after the first wave struck South Haven Beach, a new monument was unveiled at the site, a sculpture depicting intertwined DNA strands from 12 species, rising from a stylized wave. The plaque beneath it read, "In recognition of the interspecies medical collaboration that transformed tragedy into healing, our differences became our strength." Mira, now walking without assistance and serving as the director of the newly established Center for Multi-Species Medicine, stood among the diverse crowd at the dedication ceremony. Beside her were Lieutenant Arik, Dr. Solfall, and many of the patients and colleagues who had been part of the journey. Dr. Stanton, called a young Hydraxian reporter, some critics still claim that your research gives undue prominence to human biological processes. How do you respond? Mira considered the question carefully. I would say they're missing the point. This was never about humans having superior healing. It was about recognizing that every species has evolved unique survival strategies. Humans happen to be remarkably good at surviving physical trauma, probably because we've had plenty of practice falling out of trees and off cliffs throughout our evolution. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. But Pelians have neural regeneration capacities we can only dream of. she continued. Hydraxians can repair cellular damage at the molecular level, with an efficiency that puts our methods to shame. We all have something to teach and something to learn. The dedication concluded with a demonstration of new emergency medical technologies developed through the initiative. Portable units capable of adapting treatment protocols to any of the known sentient species in the galaxy. The real breakthrough wasn't technological. Mira explained to a group of medical students later, that day, as they toured the center. It was conceptual. We stopped thinking in terms of species-specific medicine and started thinking about universal biological principles expressed differently across species. One student, a young Pelian with brilliantly colored feathers, raised a tentative hand. But, Dr. Stanton, doesn't this approach risk homogenizing distinct evolutionary pathways? Some say we're creating a biological monoculture. It was a question Mira had heard before, particularly from the purity of species advocates who continued to resist the integration of medical technologies. That's a thoughtful concern, she acknowledged. But we're not replacing anyone's biology. We're learning from it. When I received Pelian neural regeneration treatments, I didn't become Pelian. My human cells simply learned new repair pathways. The diversity remains. What changes is our understanding of it. As the center's first academic year progressed, Mira found herself mentoring students from across the galaxy, each bringing unique perspectives to the emerging field of multi-species medicine. Lieutenant Eric joined the faculty as a specialist in fluid dynamics and cellular transport, his experience as both patient and healer bringing invaluable insights. Dr. Saul Fall, initially one of the most skeptical of Mira's approaches, became a passionate advocate for integrated medical technologies. Together, they published a groundbreaking paper on complementary evolution and medical synthesis that became required reading at medical academies throughout the known worlds. I never expected to be a revolutionary, Mira commented to Sol one evening as they reviewed applications for the center's expanded program. No revolutionary ever does, he replied, his feathers arranged in a pattern she had come to recognize as philosophical amusement. They simply see a truth others have overlooked. The center's work attracted attention beyond the medical community. Diplomatic delegations began requesting briefings on how the multi-species approach might inform interplanetary relations. Economic advisors studied the collaborative model for insights into resource sharing. What had begun as an emergency response to a natural disaster was evolving into a new paradigm for interspecies cooperation. Not everyone welcomed these developments. The purity of species movement gained followers in some conservative regions, arguing that biological integration threatened evolutionary integrity. Security around the center was increased after several threats, but Mira refused to be intimidated. Fear of difference is an old story, she told concerned staff members, but it's never the final chapter. 2 years after the waves that changed everything, South Haven Beach once again hosted an interspecies event, this time a scientific symposium combined with a cultural exchange. Representatives from 27 worlds gathered to share knowledge and commemorate the progress made since the disaster. Mira, now recognized throughout the galaxy for her contributions to multi-species medicine, found herself walking along the shoreline early one morning before the day's activities began. The sun was just rising, casting that same golden path across the water she had observed on the fateful day of the competition. "Full circle," remarked a familiar voice behind her. Mira turned to see Lieutenant Eric, his skin displaying patterns of contemplative nostalgia. "Not quite a circle," she replied. "More of a spiral. We've returned to the same place, but at a different level." "Philosophical this morning, are we?" Eric's skin rippled with amusement. "Just reflective," Mira said, looking out at the water. "I never imagined a random wave would lead to all this." "That's the fascinating thing about trauma," Eric observed. "It breaks things open, sometimes bodies, sometimes ideas, Speaking of which, Mira said, checking her medical scanner. How's your internal structure healing? Those reinforced connective tissues holding up? Better than original equipment, Arik confirmed. The human-inspired collagen matrix has integrated perfectly. I might take up extreme sports next. Don't push it, Mira warned with a laugh. I don't care how many human repair genes we've mapped into your system. You're still not designed for bungee jumping. Their conversation was interrupted by an alert from Mira's communicator, an incoming message from Dr. Sol Fall at the center. Mira, Sol's excited voice came through clearly. The results from the longitudinal study are in. You're going to want to see this immediately. Minutes later, Mira and Arik stood in the center's main research lab, staring at holographic displays of data collected from hundreds of patients who had received integrated treatments over the past 2 years. It's not just healing, Sol explained, his feathers arranged in a pattern of scientific excitement. It's adaptation. The integrated treatments are triggering epigenetic responses. The patient's native cells are learning from the introduced mechanisms, developing hybrid repair pathways that are more effective than either original system. Evolution in real time, whispered Mira, studying the molecular models rotating before her. Guided evolution, corrected Sol. Not random mutation, but intentional integration of complementary processes. The implications were enormous, beyond medicine, into the fundamental understanding of life itself. That afternoon, instead of delivering her planned address on emergency protocols, Mira shared the new findings with the assembled symposium delegates. What we're witnessing challenges our basic assumptions about biological boundaries, she told the hushed audience. Life, it seems, is more adaptable and more collaborative than we ever imagined. The same mechanisms that allow cells within an organism to cooperate can extend across species lines when properly translated. The response was electric, equal parts excitement and concern. Some delegates saw tremendous potential for addressing long-standing medical challenges. Others worried about unintended consequences of manipulating evolutionary pathways. We proceed with caution and transparency, Mira assured them. This isn't about creating chimeras or hybrids. It's about understanding the universal language of biology that underlies our wonderful diversity. As the symposium continued, news arrived that the Galactic Council had approved funding for an expanded research initiative based on the center's work. Representatives from 35 worlds committed to participating in the next phase of studies. That evening, a celebration was held on the beach, a far cry from the tragedy that had unfolded there 2 years earlier. Species that had once viewed each other with clinical detachment or competitive wariness now mingled freely, sharing stories and ideas under the stars. Mira found herself approached by a young human medical student whose expression held both admiration and uncertainty. Dr. Stanton, the student began hesitantly, your work is inspiring, but I'm struggling with something. If we can integrate biological processes across species so successfully, what does that mean for our identity as humans? Are we losing something essential? It was a profound question, one that Mira herself had wrestled with during her own recovery. That depends on how you define human, she replied. If humanity is a fixed set of biological traits, then yes, integration might seem threatening. But I've come to believe that what makes us human isn't our specific cellular structure or repair mechanisms. It's our capacity to adapt, to learn, to grow beyond our limitations. She gestured toward the diverse gathering around them. Look at this. 2 years ago, we were separate species with separate medical protocols, each struggling with our own biological challenges. Now, we're partners in something greater. Did we lose our humanity by learning from Pelian neural regeneration? Or did we express our humanity by reaching beyond ourselves? The student considered this. So you're saying our willingness to change is what defines us? Our willingness to integrate the best of what we encounter without losing our core identity, Mira clarified. That's not just human, it's life itself. Every complex organism on Earth evolved through similar processes of integration. We're just making it conscious rather than leaving it to chance. As the celebration continued into the night, Mira found a quiet moment to stand at the water's edge, watching the moonlight play across the waves that had nearly claimed her life. She felt the faint ache in her spine that still occasionally reminded her of that day, a small price for the journey it had initiated. "Dr. Stanton," called Ensign Kaya, now a full medical officer and key member of the research team. "They're waiting for you to begin the commemorative ceremony." Mira nodded, taking one last look at the ocean before turning toward the gathering. The assembled beings, human and non-human alike, fell silent as she approached the simple podium set up on the sand. "2 years ago, a wave struck this beach," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. "It revealed something we had overlooked in our rush to explore the stars, that our biological differences were more profound than we had acknowledged, and potentially more complementary than we had imagined." She looked out at the faces before her, some with feathers, some with scales, some with translucent skin that revealed the circulation of life beneath. "We discovered that humans can shrug off injuries that would kill other species," she continued. "Not because we are stronger or better, but because our evolutionary path demanded different solutions. And in that discovery, we found not separation but connection, a biological conversation that had been waiting to begin." Mira gestured toward the monument that now stood at the edge of the beach, its intertwined DNA strands gleaming in the moonlight. "This represents not what happened to us, but what we chose to do about it. When faced with difference, we chose integration over isolation. When confronted with others' vulnerability, we offered our resilience. And when experiencing our own limitations, we accepted others' strengths." A murmur of approval moved through the crowd. The waves that struck this beach were random events, meaningless forces of nature, Mira concluded. But the waves of change that followed were conscious choices made by beings from many worlds who recognized a simple truth. We are stronger together, not despite our differences, but because of them. As applause rose from the gathered crowd, Mira felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with a disaster had transformed not just medicine, but the very understanding of what it meant to be alive in a diverse universe. Lieutenant Eric approached, his skin displaying patterns of deep satisfaction. "Not bad for a species that evolved on dry land," he commented, with characteristic Hydraxian humor. "We had good teachers," Mira replied, smiling. "As did we," Arik acknowledged. "Though I still draw the line at skateboarding. Some human activities are best left to humans." Dr. Saul Fall joined them, his feathers arranged in a formal pattern of ceremonial respect. "The Pelian Science Academy has a saying, 'Truth comes not from looking inward, but from looking across.'" "I like that," Mira said. "As do I," agreed Saul. "Though I never fully appreciated its wisdom until a human physician showed me that my own biology had limits I hadn't recognized." Together, they watched as the ceremonial lanterns were released, hundreds of small lights rising into the night sky, each representing a patient who had benefited from the integrated medical approaches pioneered at the center. "What's next?" asked Kaya, joining their small circle. "Where does the research go from here?" Mira considered the question, watching the lights ascend. "We've only just begun to understand the language of biological integration. There are thousands of species across the galaxy, each with unique adaptations and survival strategies. The potential combinations are infinite," supplied Arik. "Not quite," corrected Sol with scientific precision, "but certainly beyond our current capacity to calculate." "The point is," Mira continued, "we're no longer limited by the boundaries of our separate evolutions. We can learn from each other in the most fundamental sense, not just sharing ideas, but sharing biological wisdom, encoded in our very cells." The commemoration concluded with a moment of silence for those who had been lost in the original disaster, the few who could not be saved despite all efforts. Mira bowed her head, remembering their names and faces, honoring the catalyst for change their passing had become. Later, as the gathering dispersed and the beach grew quiet, Mira found herself alone at the water's edge once more. The tide was coming in, gentle waves washing over her feet in rhythmic succession, so different from the rogue wave that had changed everything. She reached down and let her fingers trail through the water, feeling the connection to all the worlds it touched. Somewhere across the vastness of space, others were doing the same on their own shores, beings whose lives had been altered by the discoveries made here. Full circle, she whispered to herself, echoing Arik's earlier comment. But at a different level. The spiral continued upward, each revolution bringing new understanding, new integration, new possibilities. And at its center stood not a single species or a single solution, but the remarkable diversity of life itself, vulnerable in its separateness, resilient in its connections. Mira Stanton, once merely a human doctor, now something more complex and integrated, smiled as the water receded and then returned, a rhythm as old as planets, as new as tomorrow's discovery. The wave that had nearly ended her life had instead expanded it, proving that even destruction could become creation in the hands of those willing to learn from difference rather than fear it. As the stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that shone on countless worlds and countless forms of life, Mira turned toward the center that had grown from tragedy, ready to continue the work of healing across boundaries never before crossed. The story that had begun with a wave breaking upon a shore had become a tide of change sweeping across the galaxy, proof that sometimes the most human response to disaster is to reach beyond humanity itself.